All right, welcome back to the Male Vacancy Project podcast. I'm your host, Amadeus. This is my friend Alex that I have with me. Alex and I connected a couple of years ago at one of the workout group fitness studios that I work at, Cut 7. And he worked in politics for, 15 years? And now is out of politics and runs a small family-owned business with his dad. And we're going to talk about men's mental health and gay men and gay men's mental health.
Yeah.
Welcome on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Good to be here. I'm a fan of the podcast.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right, so we're going to start with a couple of things just to kind of give some context for the greater conversations that we're going to be having. You wanted to talk about a couple of things in particular to kind of just give a little bit of background information and understanding to anyone who's listening who might not understand or might not have been exposed to some of these topics before. So for these first couple of questions, we're going to try to keep the answers relatively short because we got a lot to cover today.
Yeah. We talked ahead of time.
Yeah.
We threw together so much content that it's like we got to spread it over 3-4 podcasts.
Yeah.
And it's all really good stuff.
It
too.
is.
It's like weighty and substantial.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so first thing, generally, is there a crisis among men? And if so, is it only among straight men, or are other groups of men experiencing crisis as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've told you this before. You're doing God's work. I think with this podcast, even some of the groups that you partner with for events, you guys cross promote each other's stuff, and I think it's so important. I think what I've heard so far that you presented, things that are important to you, and I wouldn't answer it this way if I didn't have a local validator saying there is a crisis, right? Yeah. I don't necessarily feel equipped to say that because I feel like I'm in a subset of the population of folks that you're talking to, so I probably wouldn't say it without hearing it from you and having my own suspicions about it, but it does appear that there's starting to become apparent in even the research and the numbers, especially apparent in education. For example, boys' test scores, totally different than girls' test scores. Girls getting into colleges at rates higher than boys coming out of high school. And so it does appear that there's a crisis. And what I think is fascinating is it would appear that society has already acknowledged or assumed that there's a crisis in the non-straight male community, right?
Yeah.
Society's already told us, right, what they think of us.
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? I'm not here to push back on somebody who believes that or suspects that or wants to have an opinion on the non-straight community, the LGBT community, right? That's for them to judge. But I think what's fascinating is society's only now saying, wait, there might be a fox in the hen house. And the reason I say that is because straight, white, cis, often middle or upper middle class men have a lot of influence in our society and in our culture. So it's like the joke, like in matriarchal families, when mama's not happy, nobody's happy.
Right.
I wonder if there's a little bit of that going on here, where it's like the men who are now finding themselves uncomfortable, struggling, maybe their partners are telling them, hey, something's off with you. Is everything okay?
Yeah.
Test scores are starting to shift. There's people taking notice in ways that maybe trouble in another group might not get the same notice.
Interesting.
But because
I see it.
It's a group of highly influential folks who are often in the limelight, and when there's trouble there, I think there might be a little bit louder of an alarm rung.
Yeah. No, I would agree, and that reminds me of It's actually from Ted Lasso. Did you watch that show?
My sister had a dog named Roy Kent. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah, grouchy face.
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah.
The episode where Sam speaks out against the oil rigging in Nigeria, and Ted goes to the press after the game, and he's like, when people who look like me have issues, you people report on it without us having to ask you to report on it. Sam had to go and get your attention. And I think it's the same way. It's like, men like me, cis, straight, white men, alarm bells, they just get rung when someone like me is struggling versus, non-straight men. I feel like you guys have been struggling in one way or another forever. And there's not always been alarms rung.
Mm-hmm. And I think what's fascinating about the question, and I'm sure this will come up again, it's a distinctly different struggle.
Definitely.
When somebody with a great deal of influence, right? Imagine a set of toggle switches, for example, where traits that any human being can have or not have, right? Male, female, right? Our society tends to think in binaries, right?
Very much.
Though we know these are spectrums, right? Society thinks of them as black and white, on-off switches. You're either a man or a woman.
And for the sake of the metaphor, we're just going to run.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, you can have those toggle switches on, off. If you've got the toggle switches on or mostly on and you're struggling, society is going to treat that differently than, say, if your society is, or if your group of people with the same toggle switches on or off, right? That same combination kind of creates that cohesive group. Struggles with, say, a health crisis like the HIV/AIDS epidemic, right? Two totally different struggles, right? And society treats them very, very differently.
Definitely. Yeah, and that was, the toggle switch was one of the clarifying questions to frame the conversation coming up. So let's speak a little more to that. When you say the toggle switches, specific traits, elaborate.
Yeah, for sure. So I understand society to value certain things and not value or devalue certain things. I would like to approach it just from a theoretical standpoint, right? You can probably guess my position on how society values and devalues certain things, but just from a theoretical perspective, right? Taking both of us out of it, right? So man, woman, right? Toggle switch is either a man or a woman in society's eyes, right? Tall, short, right? Rich, poor, gay, straight, right? And there's,
racial toggle switches.
Exactly,
white,
black, white, right?
Yeah.
The literal black and white. And I don't think you'd have a strong argument to say society doesn't value one of those values more than the other, right? We can probably understand that toggle switches switch toward straight, white, cis, rich man is probably going to be a little more valued by society at large, right? Depending on the context that you're in, the neighborhood that you're in, the city that you're in, the state that you're in, the region that you're in. Generally, I think you'd have a hard argument to make to say that that's not true. So that's kind of the lens through which I see this specific conversation that you want to have today, because when those toggle switches are switched on for you, it's not that you haven't struggled, right? When 100%. Somebody says, hey, the world sees you differently than it does me. I don't believe that that's what they're saying. It's certainly not what I'm saying. And I don't think it's what you're saying. I think what is important to understand is that when folks struggle, whether it's a white, straight, cis, rich man, or a non-straight, cis, white man. It's just that the struggles that you have in your life, maybe it's dealing with insecurity, right? It's only that the person whose toggle switches are geared towards society's acceptance didn't have to also struggle with one of those toggle switches being off in society's eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I had the idea when we were talking about this the other day. This example popped into my head of, say you're a 30-year-old man living in Appalachia, right? Notoriously one of the lowest income bracket areas in the country. You have a wife who is the same age as you. You work full time. She stays home with the kids. You have 2 kids. They're like 4 and 8, we'll say. You make $25,000 a year. You barely afford to get by. You go to the store. You see both the price of milk and eggs have gone up. You now have to make a decision about which one you're going to get. That's a fucking hard life. That is really hard to deal with those economic struggles. And you're white. Now your neighbor, same job as you, also has a wife, same age, 2 kids, same age. Your neighbor's black, makes the same amount of money as you. He also has to make the decision about milk or eggs now, but because he's black and he lives in Appalachia, which is, I would imagine, a slightly more racist area, he also needs to worry about, is the store clerk going to refuse me service because I'm black? It's not that the white guy's life is not hard. It's that he just doesn't have to worry about also, am I even going to be able to shop at this store because of my skin color?
Yeah, for sure. And let's make it even a little more nuanced. Let's say both of them get to shop there. Is the store clerk going to hold the $20 bill he uses to pay with up to the light to check if it's real? Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I
didn't even think of that. So that's yeah, you're spot on.
So it's that spectrum that we talk about. It's not always just so immediately yes or no. It's, does somebody have to face the daily humiliations of a society or a neighbor or a store clerk who treats you differently?
Yes.
Even if it's not, you can't shop there.
Right.
It's, did something happen to you that shouldn't have happened to you?
Yeah. And in the case of that store clerk, maybe the store clerk is not overtly racist. Like, he's never going to speak badly about anyone who is not white. But the holding the bill up to the light is a kind of a subconscious thing in the store clerk's mind that, like, maybe because he's not white, maybe because he's black, maybe this bill is counterfeit. And that's something that I think a lot of white people don't even realize, that they have those preconceived notions, those discriminations that they carry around with them, that they don't even think about. They think, I'm not racist, I don't hate black people, but then they go and they do something like that, and they don't even realize that there's anything wrong with that, right? And that's when we talk about, like, the greater conversation of race, that's one of the hardest things to deal with, is because that's not overt racism. That's subtle. That's under the radar. That's subconscious. That's the hard one to kick.
Absolutely.
And when we talk about, so the reason that we're talking about this too is because the P word, privilege.
Absolutely.
This is what privilege means. And privilege, as you brought up, is a really charged word. A lot of people who have all the toggle switches turned on, white, cis, straight men, well off, middle class, upper middle class, they have privilege. Even if they're not upper middle class, even if they are poor, they still have white privilege. They still have straight privilege. But that word makes it sound almost insensitive to the struggles that man has faced.
Absolutely. We need a different word for it.
Yeah,
because,
I agree.
Because privilege, it sounds like you're a king or a queen.
Yeah.
And
there's nothing wrong with your life.
Right. I would love maybe a listener to write in or DM you about a proposal for a different word, because number one, I think it suggests the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Number two, it's incredibly charged, and I would love to avoid all partisan conversations with a 10-foot pole in this conversation, because it's so much bigger than politics. What you're wanting to talk about today, it's so much more important. But it's become politically charged.
Yeah.
Dare I say, partisan, in a partisan way.
Yeah.
And I just think it's misunderstood. When I use it, and then somebody pushes back, and then we do have a conversation, a nuanced give and take about it, I'm like, oh, we actually agree. It's the word that's getting in the way.
Yeah. I think that happens so often in our society too, is the language that we're using has been so politically charged, and like specific words have been so vilified. I remember I had a conversation with one of my friends he's a traditional Republican. He doesn't like Trump, but he voted for every Republican before Trump. He's Catholic. He didn't think he was pro-choice because he thought, I would never get an abortion myself because of my Catholic values. And I talked with him about it. I was like, cool, great. Would you stop me and my partner from getting an abortion? And he was like, no, that's your choice. I was like, so then you're pro-choice. It's like it's the words, the language that we use has become so politically charged, so vilified in some cases, that you can't even like get through a basic conversation without having to completely break down the lexicon that we're using.
Sure. As evidenced by having to have the conversation about the P word. I mean, I almost didn't want to say it today because people shut down, and then they don't listen to anything after that, because they're like, this guy thinks I've had an easy life.
Right.
And that couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah, definitely. All right, next question. Should we even engage in score settling by playing the Oppression Olympics? And what is the Oppression Olympics?
Yeah, my best friend from preschool had a pretty tough life. And really rough dad, didn't resource her and acknowledge her in the way that she deserved. Not a ton of money in the family. She tells a story about being really affected by being the only girl in our small Christian evangelical high school who couldn't afford, whose family couldn't afford the same basketball shoes that everybody else wore.
Damn.
And so I don't know if I was fully aware of it at the time. I knew a slice of what she was going through, only to grow up and realize, whoa, there was a lot going on there, that she shouldn't have had to experience. And it ended up being traumatic for her to not have the basketball shoes, as it would be for any high school kid, right? Who wants to fit in and have friends and play on the basketball team.
Yeah.
And so I was struggling, I think, with some family stuff. And of course, she was one of the first people I called. And after an hour of probably, dumping my trauma and feelings about it on her, I came to, and I said, I am so sorry. I just completely dumped my family stuff on you and the stuff that I'm struggling with my family, and I forgot, or I didn't acknowledge, or maybe I wasn't sensitive enough that your family upbringing was far more difficult than mine was. And she said one of the wisest things that anybody has ever said to me. She said, stop. We are not going to play the Oppression Olympics. The way you are struggling with the conditions that you're under right now are no better or worse, harder, easier than the situation that I struggled with. And I get chills remembering that story, I get chills telling that story, because what she did in that moment was unlocked the ability for me to fully feel what was going on for me in the moment. I didn't have her upbringing. I struggled in a different way. And in that moment when I called her, I was struggling in a different way. And she had the humility and the grace, the magnanimity and the generosity of spirit to say, stop. Rich people can struggle. Poor people can struggle. And they experience it the same.
Yeah.
They're just both human beings. And so I'll never forget the term that she just dropped like a golden treasure. The oppression Olympics. We're not going to play the oppression Olympics.
Wow. That's so powerful. Next question. Does privilege benefit the privileged?
I heard probably a podcast or a radio show, recently, and I heard somebody argue that the benefits, right, largely societal benefits that a human being receives from being society's preferred, right, whatever that is, right? And that can change over time.
Yeah.
I'd love to see society's value on certain things change, right? But that's a different podcast. And so I heard this person say, you might think that receiving something for which you didn't work or you didn't deserve benefits you. And in the moment, it probably feels like it, right? And in the moment, maybe it even does in a small way, right? Over time, as society bestows benefits on a preferred group of people, my fear is that allows that group of people to atrophy or to cease to develop and use coping mechanisms that other groups who society doesn't value as much have to do.
Yeah.
And so I'm still playing with the idea, but I think it's a fascinating argument that perhaps, just perhaps, being a privileged member, right, a false inflation of society's view of you, for example, due to traits, right, about yourself, it might feel good, right?
Yeah.
That you might get a ton of benefits that you think are good because in the moment they probably arguably are, right? Zooming out, I think that question is fair, and in light of this specific conversation that you want to have, I think it's an exceedingly important question to consider.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying. I think about, I knew a guy who he had a trust fund. He was like in his mid-20s. He was getting $100,000 every year from his trust fund, and he would just go and blow it. And he never really held down a stable job. He never developed discipline or hard work or a fitness routine or a good nutrition routine. He's, as far as I know, he's still living at home playing video games all day because he never learned the value of hard work and discipline and the value of going out and working for the money, because he always just had it handed to him. And so I think in a lot of ways, like, yes, must be nice to just get $100,000 every year.
Who would say no?
Yeah, who would say no to that?
Yeah.
Like, that sounds so great, right? Free money. But like you said, the atrophy of skills, I can't imagine a worse hell.
Yeah. And that's why I hesitated to just answer the question.
Yeah.
I think it's an important question to ask. And I think it's good to have that in the ether as we talk about this topic. But I think in the moment, it must feel this is good and this is right. And then zooming out after a lifetime of that, you might make a different decision.
Yeah.
Looking back on,
Yeah.
Years of, falsely inflated income, for example, where it's like, oh,
or a sense of worth, or like,
work is healing. I believe work is healing.
I agree. Yeah. All right, next one. What is the male attraction spectrum? Is it binary, and where do bisexual men fit?
Yeah, I think can we curse on this podcast?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think bisexual men get shat on all the time. And so much so that I don't think I know any bisexual man who's just open about it and is known as that. I don't. It's not a thing.
Interesting.
In my life, I'm sure I know bisexual men who don't lead with that. Right? Like that's not a part of their identity. Where it's very apparent from your life that you're straight, right? And it's very apparent from my life that I'm gay.
Yeah.
And so, right, it's that discomfort in Western society with the spectrum.
Yeah.
Right? It's the discomfort
Society wants you to be one or the other.
Society loves a toggle switch. Our iPhones are full of them, right? You turn a feature on or off, right? I don't think that human beings are that simple.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I think about the greater community of men and who we're attracted to, I think of a spectrum, right? And so, primarily on one end of the spectrum, gay men are attracted to men. On the other end of the spectrum, straight men are attracted to women, right? And I think it's that discomfort that we have in the middle, which is like, what if you're just a human being trying to find your way, right? Like, for example, I think Kerry Washington and Rachel McAdams are exceedingly attractive, right? So I'm also not on that.
100%.
Right? I'm also not on that, black or white, on or off, 1 or 0 binary either.
Right.
And so I think it's reductive to ask human beings to fit into a toggle switch.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. All right, so on to the big topics.
All right.
So first up, what does it mean to be a man? Kind of generally, and what is it to be a cis man versus a straight man, or a gay man versus a bi man? Or sorry, did I say cis versus straight?
Yeah, I was gonna clean that up afterwards, but you'll get it.
Cis versus trans man. Gay man versus bi man versus straight man, or somewhere on the anywhere on the spectrum that we just talked about. What does it mean to be a man?
I'd actually love to reflect the big one back to you and ask you to kind of like set the table for what a man is, and then I'm happy to kind of like fill in some of those other ones. But I'm super curious, like as somebody who runs a successful podcast, runs amazing, in-person events, partners with other organizations, wanting to make sure, like they ask the question, are the kids okay? Like you're asking, are the men okay?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear like what's your experience like? What's your suspicion about what a man is?
Yeah. I think of it as like there are certain principles of masculinity that make a man, I would say a mature man or an integrated masculine man. Society at large or someone else might say a real man, quote unquote, right? What makes a man a real man? I think of it in principles, because I don't like the idea that like if you shoot guns, you're a man. That's a thing. If you drive classic cars, you're a man. If you are capable of beating someone up, you're a man. Like those are tangible things, and tangible things can be done by children, literal children. Those things could all be done by an 8-year-old boy. That doesn't mean that he's a man. So to me it's how do we do those things? What principles do we abide by? So big principles to me that stand out for what makes a man a mature, healthy, masculine, integrated, quote unquote, a real man, is they have respect for themselves and for other people. That's one of the biggest ones. Do you respect yourself? Do you respect your fellow human, regardless of who they are, what they look like, who they love?
What are those? Remind me what that group of attributes that we've talked about before is called the Stoic.
Stoic
principles.
Yes.
Yeah. What? How does
Stoic principles.
How does that relate to kind of the general idea that we're trying to form, which is like, what is a man? And I hope that a lot of the questions that we ask today, your listeners and viewers don't necessarily get an answer to. Right? I hope that
a hard answer.
Yeah, I hope that we're asking such important fundamental questions that maybe they're not meant to be answered by you or me.
Yeah.
Maybe they're meant to sit, out there and kind of,
let it stew a little bit.
let it simmer, and like, who the fuck cares about what a guy on a podcast thinks? Like, it matters what your listeners think.
Right.
It matters what your viewers hear when they hear the questions, and it matters how they respond to those questions. You and I might have ideas about what a man is. I'm not here to define.
We have what we think.
Sure. Yeah, I'm certainly not here to tell somebody else.
Yeah, but my word isn't law.
For sure. But I love when, I was kind of listing some things a couple weeks ago for you, and you're like, oh, that sounds a lot like the Stoic.
Yeah.
Is that what is that? Is it a lifestyle? Is it a set of principles? Is it a quasi religion? Is it a way of life? I'm curious.
The way Stoicism has experienced a resurgence in our society among young men specifically, I think a lot of people would say it's borderline religion or cult. So Stoicism is kind of a way of viewing life. The Stoics were a group of philosophers from ancient Greece and I think primarily ancient Greece, maybe into ancient Rome as well, who just, Marcus Aurelius was one of them. Plato, I think Socrates was one. They were philosophers who just, everything kind of was like non-reactionary.
Reserved.
Very reserved.
Calmness.
Yes. Emotional regulation. To an extreme.
So much control that you don't need to react and respond to everything that's around you or that's coming your way.
Yeah.
There's like that
almost like someone says something to you and you're able to, instead of reacting to it with any kind of anything, you say, this is not worth my time to even address, so I'm just going to walk away.
Yeah.
And you can see where, there is one reason why Stoicism has had such a resurgence, and his name is Ryan Holiday. Okay. He does the Daily Stoic, a podcast, a book, and he's the reason, 100% he's the reason. But you can see why, for young men who are searching for what it means to be a man, you can see why this is kind of attractive to them. It's a way, it's a definitive way to live your life and to view the world that allows you control. And I think that is something that a lot of young men are searching for, is control, both over themselves and the world around them, because for so long, men have had control.
There you go.
For the entirety of human history, right? Men have had control of society. And now we are in a place in this world, in our society, where men are losing their grasp on total control. And rightly so. We never should have had total control, right? Yeah. Women are having a renaissance of liberties, of income, of the ability to just live their own life without being defined by a man. And that is incredible. There are consequences. And consequences tend to be immediately associated with negative. And I want to nip that in the bud right now. Consequences are neutral. There are negative consequences. There are positive consequences. to everything. I think one of the consequences of the women's movement at large, women's suffrage and women's equality and equity movement that we have seen over the last, honestly, coming up on a century, is a lot of men don't know what to do with themselves. When you have been in a position of power for so long, equality feels like
Oppression.
oppression. Yes, thank you. Equality feels like oppression, and I think that's where a lot of young men are right now. Is they saw the power that our fathers, our grandfathers had, our ancestors had, and now we get into adult life, and we don't have any of that power anymore, or we have a fraction of the power that men used to enjoy.
Yeah, and power that I would argue was falsely inflated all along.
Absolutely.
And it goes back
100%.
to something we were talking about earlier. The power and the influence that men have had for hundreds, thousands, millennia.
Yeah.
I think we have to ask the question: did it truly benefit them all those years?
Yeah.
Because what's happening now?
Yeah.
Right? When we're back to approaching homeostasis, right? A little more balance.
Yeah.
How does it feel?
Yeah.
Right? As evidenced by the need for this podcast,
sure.
Probably not so good.
Yeah. 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 And that gets back to what we were talking about earlier of, does privilege actually privilege the people who are privileged?
Yeah. Fair.
I think what we're seeing with regards to male loneliness and the crisis of young men at large in America, an argument would be made for no. It hasn't benefited us.
It's felt really good for a lot of men for a long time, and is that false inflation of power and influence really a life truly lived?
Yeah.
I don't know the answer to that. Was that real life?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did we leave off where asking after what is a man, what is a gay man, whatever?
Yeah.
Is that where we left off? Okay.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have answers to those questions, so I think it's fair to pose them, for folks listening and folks watching. I don't necessarily feel the need to answer them, but I think it's a cool exercise to say, hey, if we're talking about a crisis or resourcing a group of people who seem to be struggling, it's fair to ask, hey, what are these different groups, right? I'm not gonna tell you that I have the answer, but considering those things in your head, even just listening at home or watching at home, I think it's important.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had asked about me, what I think being a man is. So I went and grabbed the book that I wrote a chapter in about men's mental health and masculinity. And in this book, because I was struggling to think of things off the top of my head, but very much thought about this for months as I was writing. So the big principles that I cite in this book, respect, as I said, respect of yourself and respect of every human you come into contact with, accountability, reliability, and responsibility are huge ones. I think a man needs to be accountable. A man needs to be responsible, and he needs to be reliable, not only to other people but to himself. Are you accountable to the words that you make to yourself? You make a promise to yourself. Are you keeping it? I think that's so important for men. There's also confidence and assertiveness. I think a man needs to be comfortable and confident in his own skin, and he needs to be able to assert himself when boundaries are crossed and when things happen around him that he does not agree with or that he thinks are wrong. I think a man needs to be capable of asserting himself in those situations.
And certainly when justice is not being served.
Absolutely. And that there was something you sent me, video from Scott Galloway.
Oh.
I don't think it was a video that you sent me,
Okay.
but I saw another video where he was talking about some things about being a man. And one of the things that he talks about that I agree with, and you know, there's plenty of things that he says that I don't agree with.
Yeah,
but a lot of what he talks about young men and about the state of being a man,
I think he's raising two boys.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I think he's got a pretty good head on him when it comes to masculinity.
For sure. And I think he sees the same need that you see with doing what you're doing.
Yeah, and he talks about a man should take it as his responsibility to, if he sees another group of people being oppressed, whether or not he agrees with what that group of people do, it is his duty to protect and to advocate for their freedom to exist. And I think I couldn't agree more.
And especially because there's a certain physical power associated with men, generally.
100%.
And there's also a certain amount of societal power associated with a man. So I think within that climate, it makes a lot of sense for that to be...
Use your privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
Use your privilege for the benefit of those that don't have the same privileges. And that privilege could be a greater amount of physical strength because we biologically have more testosterone and are on average larger than females. Or it could be societal privilege of I'm white and so I can get away with talking to a police officer in a certain way. And so if I see an interaction between a cop and say a black man and it's going a way that I don't like, maybe I as a white man step in to make sure that like something bad doesn't happen because like, let's be honest, shit happens. So using your privilege in that way, I think is important.
Incredibly.
There's three others. There's strength and courage. Strength is typically thought of as physical, and while I think physical strength does matter, I think the mental and emotional side of strength are far more important. Having a certain mental strength and emotional strength is really, really important to a man.
Yeah, like that control that we were talking about with the Stoics. Like, you know, so centered in yourself that a lot of the stuff swirling around you in life, whether you lived as a Greek philosopher all those years ago, or you're in 2025 and you know life is swirling around you fast, that inner self-control is timeless.
Yeah, and that brings me to another one, which is temperance and emotional regulation, which temperance is one of the Stoic principles. And it's the ability to maintain a level head in the face of adversity, responding instead of reacting to life around you. I think is so important. And I think that's one of the biggest dividing lines between boys and men, regardless of age. You know, you could be a 60-year-old boy living in a man's body, right? And if you are not capable of emotionally regulating, then that's a pretty tall tale sign to me that this person is immature and they are not existing as a man. They're in kind of their boy energy.
Something just hit me. I was struggling when we were talking earlier about like, what is a man? Because I was thinking about all the things, you know, you were listing things that I was saying, and I was like, well, those could be true of women too, right?
Definitely.
But I think what you just said triggered it for me, because maybe it's not like, what is a man versus a woman? But maybe the real question is, when does somebody become a man in
man
their
versus a
development?
boy.
There you go. Yeah.
Interesting.
It's not like instead of like longitudinal, it's a latitudinal study. Instead of comparing the toggle switch left and right, it's like, okay, the question really becomes, it was what you said about being a 6-year-old. I'm like, okay, that makes more sense to me than the binary between the sexes, what body parts you were born with. It makes a lot more sense to say, okay, what is a man and when do you become one? What qualities do you start to exhibit that are a group of qualities that somebody could say, oh, he's demonstrating an incredible amount of maturity in these areas, that triggered that for me.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's a conversation that I've struggled with at times as well, because like in talking with my friends about these things, they're like, how is that different from a woman?
Fair.
And I didn't really have an answer.
Yeah, I didn't either until just now.
Yeah.
Just literally just now. We were listing things. I was like, okay, women can be, strong, arguably they should be. And I'm talking about like emotionally strong, right? Men should be
also physically strong.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. But I think whatever you just read in there, I was like, okay, now framing the question that way makes a lot more sense than saying, what is a man and all the things that a woman isn't, right? For me, now that just triggered that for me, like the Oprah aha moment is, at what point in your trajectory do you exhibit these qualities that are important? And I think a massive word that you've used a couple times is like the maturity.
Yeah.
Right? The maturity to have compassion, kindness, temperance, the emotional control, generosity.
Yeah, generosity is a good one too. Which leads me to some of the follow-up questions surrounding this. Do the same beliefs around masculinity apply to our non-straight brothers, or non-cis straight brothers, that they do apply to those of us who are cis and straight?
Yeah, I think that it's the question of the hour in our political climate right now. Is it important for non-straight men to also have temperance? Is it also important for us to have strength? Is it also important for us to have the same, be held to the same standards?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is yes. I think there's a blurring or a confusion that our society is having to grapple with right now, which is like, is this person who's also, is this man who's married to a man also held to the same standards that this man who's married to a woman is also held to?
Yeah.
I think society has a hard time with that. I don't think society knows where itself is at right now.
Yeah, and I wondered too, one of the kind of like follow-up questions that I wrote down in my notes to that question was like, is there leniency on what it means to be a, quote, real man for non-straight men? Or is there a higher standard that those men need to meet to be considered a real man, a masculine man, because they are commonly thought of in society as more feminine men?
Yeah. Does a gay man have to have 92 guns if it makes you a man to have 70 guns? Right.
Yeah.
I do.
Does a gay man literally need to chop his own firewood?
Right. Fair. Totally. And I think that the farcical nature of those questions that we just posed demonstrates the farcical nature of society's misunderstanding of men on the sexual attraction spectrum.
Yeah. How does all of this affect the mental health of non-straight men? Do gay men, trans men think about being a real man in the same way that a straight man might worry about being perceived as a real man?
The way I think about it, Amadeus, is a Kurt Vonnegut quote. He says something to the effect of, I'm going to have to look up the quote, but it's about not having the guts to come out as gay, so you come out, like you tell your parents you're an English major or something, they'll be like equally disappointed. You know?
I think I've heard that quote.
This man is brilliant. And so one of the things that I think is an important question to pose, and I'm sure people are going to get so annoyed about just posing questions and giving no answers. But I think it's important to understand the context in which straight men exist as expected by society.
Yeah.
Right? Your options for you expressing yourself in your life are far more limited by
huge.
society, right?
Yeah.
Okay? Back to the Kurt Vonnegut quote. Gay men or non-straight men have already disappointed society, right? We're already, out of the top rung of the power pyramid. So our options are more flexible, right?
You can be whoever the hell you want to be.
You really have no more disappointment to give society, right?
Yeah.
Society's already told us what they think of us. So there is a great diversity of expressions of what it means to be a man in the non-straight world, right? And again, I have often asked myself, has that limited expectation of society benefited straight men, right? Or has it tied you in a straitjacket in which straight men find themselves struggling today?
Yeah. I mean, I would say from personal experience, I would say it's more straitjacket. I struggled for so long with this idea of being a man and what it meant to be a man and trying to fit into this carefully curated box of society of like, these are the things that a man does. A man doesn't sit with his legs crossed like this. He sits with his legs crossed like this.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Like little
a man doesn't
bullshit
carry
things.
his textbooks in grade school up here. A man carries them down here. There you go.
Yeah. A man doesn't have a small bag that he carries things in. It's either in your pockets or it's in a backpack.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
So society's expectations, right? Because otherwise it means you've disappointed society and all bets are off, and you lose the falsely inflated benefits that I would argue come with existing in this narrow lane. You know, if it feels like a straitjacket, it could be because it's not, we get criticized a lot for being not natural. It's not natural, right? What we do?
Sure.
It's not natural to be in a straitjacket and to have society tell you it's either in your pocket or it's in a backpack, because this specific bag, you lose the benefits of privilege if you carry your bag like
points.
this.
Yeah, you lose man points.
Yeah.
And it's funny.
Talk about unnatural.
Yeah, and it's funny too because The Hangover just popped into my head. Like, we joke about this in things about like the man purse was a thing that like gained in popularity several years ago, and then like The Hangover, it's not a purse, it's a satchel, right? Like the word that you use for it makes a difference as to like if it's masculine or not. Indiana Jones had a satchel, and it's like, how fucking absurd is that?
Absurd, farcical. These are all false boundaries between the greater community of men.
Yeah.
Right?
And we see the breaking down of it too, and the subsequent pushback on the breaking down of it by pioneers. Caleb Williams comes to mind. You know who that is? Mm-mm. So he's the starting quarterback for the Chicago Bears. He was drafted number 1 overall. Absolute stud of a player. He paints his nails regularly. He paints his nails when he was in college. He continues to paint his nails now that he's a year into his professional career. There's a video of him jumping into the stands and crying in his mom's arms.
Now I know who you're talking about.
Like, this is a man who has achieved the pinnacle of masculine stuff in that he plays professional football, and yet he paints his nails and he cries in his mom's arms at the stadium, which are thought of as being feminine things to do. Those are not things that men are thought to do. And he's challenging the stereotypes. He's challenging those barriers. And there's a lot of pushback among, you know, quote unquote traditional men of like, oh, why does he need to paint his nails? That's, you know, and it's like, why can't he paint his nails?
Yeah.
There's sometimes I feel like I want to paint my nails.
Yeah, and it reminds me of you know, the spectrum of what's acceptable. You know, the full expression of men from, you know, what society thinks of as feminine versus what society thinks of as masculine, right?
Yeah.
What he's doing is he's taking the very narrow window of acceptability on that full spectrum of expression and just pushing it,
Yeah.
pushing it, and saying, hey, if it's also acceptable for me to be a masculine man, an acceptable man in society's eyes, and I can paint my nails, I have pushed the window over for all of these men who also paint their nails, who society might have said before, you're unacceptable because you're not straight.
Yeah.
But he's given a permission structure for people to say, you know what, I'm going to be okay with my neighbors, Mike and Tim, because what's his name paints his nails on the Chicago Bears.
Right. Which seems so absurd that like that's the thing that needs to happen for someone to be okay with their gay neighbors. But
it's a million of those micro things, I would argue.
It is. Yeah. And kind of back to the question that sparked all of this, how might this affect the mental health of our gay, bi, and trans brothers? It sounds like positively. It sounds like you guys feel more free to express yourselves because of the just fracturing of society's expectations of you as a man. And so there's a certain freedom, and you mentioned unbridled joy were the words that you used. And I wonder, do you think it's related?
I think when a society or your own culture tells you, as soon as you know who you are, admit it to yourself, process it, and maybe let the world, society know who you are.
Yeah.
And that means they're disappointed in you. You know, you're bad. Your rights are going to be on the menu at every election, right? I think you get out ahead of the work of coping.
Yeah.
I think you get out ahead of the struggle and work the muscle of coping mechanisms and processing the trauma that it necessarily is for everybody who society says, you don't have privilege. You don't have a voice here. Or more accurately, your voice doesn't matter as much as Amadeus's.
Yeah.
And so I don't think maybe I'm not going to answer for an entire group of an entire community of people, but I do think it's incredibly important to understand that when you go through the trauma of having to tell a society, this is who I am, and know and feel that the society at large is disappointed in you, right? Even if your parents are the most accepting parents in the world, and your family, you know, goes and, you know, buys a rainbow flag on the day you come out, that is not your experience in society.
Yeah.
Right? I just think that when you don't experience a lot of those toggle switches being off, you don't necessarily have the skills from the jump to deal with the trauma of the oppression that the equality that feels like oppression when society starts to shift and change around you.
Yeah.
And and approaching equality feels like, ooh, this is not feeling
Yeah.
comfortable anymore.
I don't like
It doesn't
this.
feel like what my dad and my grandpa experienced.
Right.
Well, no shit, Sherlock, it's not.
Yeah.
It's 2025. So it's like we've already been through the HIV/AIDS crisis. I haven't, but my community has.
Right.
I know I've heard the stories of men who told me they would go to 3 funerals a week
Holy
and
shit.
and not to know why they died.
Oh my God.
Had a suspicion, of course, right? Families not allowing the friends of the deceased to go to the funeral, or families not even showing up to their funeral, and their friends having to do the funeral for them. So when the trauma is kind of like baked in from the jump, right? You learn how to depend on each other. You learn how to put together the support groups. You learn how to advocate for a designation of a month called Pride Month,
Right.
to celebrate your community, because society could take you or leave you, right?
Yeah.
This is not something that society celebrates. And so
Yeah.
when you have to dig deep and do it yourself and band together, you do develop the muscles of dealing with disappointment, discomfort, building community, which is fascinating to me to see. You have to do that in 2025 for a group of people who all the toggle switches are turned on for,
Yeah.
right? It's a fascinating and seismic shift in our culture that I didn't see a lot of people forecasting.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, you talk about like the support groups and community and banding together and all the things like that. And men are just now starting to create support groups.
Yeah.
Men are just now starting to create men's groups and communities. And it's really cool to see.
Because the numbers tell us,
Now we need them.
yeah, massive incidence of male loneliness.
Yeah.
Massive deficit between men and women in suicide rates.
Yeah.
A closing wage gap. Though it's probably important for the fabric of society that we approach homeostasis again.
Definitely.
They can't feel awesome.
Yeah.
Right? And so, if you're, calling your community to task, it's also important for me to let folks know it's okay to feel the way you feel, right? And it's okay to suddenly feel, I need a little more support than I thought I did. I thought I could be the aloof Marlboro man on horseback with a cowboy hat and need human contact once a month. That's not possible.
Yeah.
You are just a human being like anybody and everybody else, and there is no need to play the oppression Olympics. Your struggle and what you are feeling right now is valid. It's real. It might take growing a muscle that has atrophied due to a false inflation of power, status in society based on traits that society deems more valuable than others. But that's the work that other groups have had to do, that we're just more used to doing it.
Yeah.
Right? We've just had a little more practice.
Yeah.
Right? We've got support groups. We've been through health crises. Other communities have done a great job under duress in response to trauma, in response to discrimination, in response to misunderstanding, in response to vilification, right? The natural human impulse to say, if we stick together, we can get through this, is not something that white, straight, cis, rich men have necessarily had to do before.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a really tangible example of what you're talking about is community spaces. You know, we've seen a kind of a systematic dismantling of men's only spaces, and you know, things like men's only bars, things like the Boy Scouts, things like this, right? I think those spaces played a role. In a lot of cases, they needed to be dismantled because things were happening in those spaces. You know, the Scouts in particular, like, men became in control of the Scouts who were taking advantage of young boys. We needed to dismantle the Scouts, unfortunately.
So to your point, it's not that those spaces existed that it was the issue. It was the abuse of those spaces.
Yes, 100% the abuse of those spaces. And so now, and because we used to have all of these spaces just readily available, the structure was there in society. We could, if I felt like I needed some like masculine time, you know, I could,
which was a great support for men, right?
Yeah.
In those times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really unfortunate that due to whatever it was, atrophy, resting on our laurels, that men at large didn't do a good job showing restraint in those spaces and saying, just because this is a men-only space does not mean that I'm going to go home and beat my wife.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I think it's so important to say, if we are going to say men's only space, women's only space, gay only space, heaven forbid, a gay bar, right? It's important for us to show restraint, humility, and say, though I do feel a great deal of support when I go to a gay bar, because it's people like me who understand me.
Yeah.
And largely, I'm not going to maybe face some of the daily indignities that I would elsewhere. It's important for us, whether it's a men's only space, a gay bar, to enter those spaces and to hold those spaces with humility and restraint. And for people who don't belong to those communities, who are present in those spaces, right? Straight people at a gay bar, for example, to also understand we're on hallowed ground when we're in those spaces. This community has fought tooth and nail to create a space.
To be able to even have that space.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I find it, I you know, as we were talking about the coping mechanisms and all of that, the gay community had to fight tooth and nail to get those spaces, because it was the only space, I imagine it was the only space where you really felt safe in society, emotionally safe, without the judgment of society as a whole. And having a space where you feel safe like that is so important. And for men, we're talking about the coping mechanisms and men learning how to cope
with the equality that feels like oppression.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. With the equality that feels like oppression, but also like with men's only spaces are not protected by society anymore. We have to go out and create those spaces now.
And you have to lobby society for them, just like we have had to.
Right. Yeah, that's true. And I mean, I've had friends of mine who are women who question the men's group, you know, the one that my friend Sam runs, Masculinity Project. You know, it was an interesting conversation I had with her, because she was like, I recognize that you guys need the space, but there's a part of me that inherently is a little fearful that the space will become abused and it will just become a pool of men to pour just hate on everyone who is not them, and basically turn into a a real life in person version of the incel community online.
What I think is so important about that concern is
Which is a valid concern.
I'm so grateful that she brought it up, because it would not be an appropriate concern if this community hadn't dropped the ball before.
Yes.
Right?
100%.
Fair concern.
Yeah.
Fair concern, right? It's happened before.
Yeah.
With power and privilege became an abuse of power and privilege. And so now there's a reckoning, right?
Yeah.
Greater society is saying, hey, we haven't necessarily loved how your leadership has worked out, so we're going to try something else. Please feel free to stick around, right? Now, you also have to apply for committee room space like everybody else.
Yeah.
You don't have the dedicated office that you did before.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that feels like, right? I'm not going through that. Like I said, I had to front load my trauma processing when I came out, right? I had to do that at 21, 22, 23, for example, right? And so you find your local gay bars. You find your local gay men's chorus, right? Because you have to.
Yeah.
When you have the toggle switches on that society values, you don't need to find a support group. Why would you join?
Right.
A chorus if your very existence wasn't being questioned, for example.
Yeah.
You wouldn't need to. And so many straight, white, cis, upper middle class men never had to find groups, right?
Yeah.
And so now I think it's incredibly important that you are seeing a need and you're saying, guys, we're approaching equality here and homeostasis. And I do not mean to suggest to anybody listening or watching that I think we're even close to where we need to be.
Yeah. No, I don't think so.
With regard to equal rights and equal resources. But it's enough to where the people who used to be in charge and benefit from that are feeling discomfort.
Yeah.
And exhibiting signs of distress, fear, anxiety, paranoia, all the things that are completely natural for any human being, no matter who was in charge. Any group of people would feel a certain way about having to say, okay, now I have to show up in the way that a lot of these other groups have had to show up.
Yeah.
And that doesn't feel great.
Yeah. Yeah, and I there's multiple things that came to mind, and I'm going to try to remember all of them.
I'm sure they'll come up.
But one thing that is in my mind right now, men at large have dropped the ball in the past. I mean, continue to, but like men at large have dropped the ball when handed the privileges that society has handed us. And when it comes to creating new spaces, when it comes to creating men's spaces, when it comes to making sure that we don't continue to drop the ball, it is up to us to keep the other men accountable. It's up to the good men to keep the other men accountable. And it's not up to the women to make sure that men don't abuse their power. It's up to the other men. And I made this connection. There are so many I love looking at the things that I watched or I read or I listened to as a kid and rewatching them now as an adult and seeing the lessons that story was trying to instill. And the one that stood out to me is I recently rewatched the Harry Potter series. And in the first movie, there's that scene where Neville stands up to Harry, Hermione, and Ron. And he's like, you guys can't go out again. You're going to get us in trouble again. And Dumbledore rewards him and says something along the lines, it takes a great deal of courage to stand up to your enemies, but it takes a great deal more to stand up to your friends. That that lesson, whoa.
Yeah.
It takes so much strength and courage and confidence in yourself as a man to stand up to other men and say, hey, cut the shit. This is not okay. Stop abusing women. Stop abusing kids. Stop doing this. Stop buying guns and shooting up schools, because it's not minorities that are shooting schools up. It's not women that are shooting schools up. It's straight white men. It is up to the straight white men to keep the others accountable, to keep them in line, and to keep them in check. And you know, Diddy was a big conversation earlier this year, and I wonder how many guys in his posse knew what was going on. Were they complicit? Or did they genuinely not know? It is so important that as men, we do not just be complicit in the evil of other men. It's our responsibility to stand up and to keep those men accountable.
Certainly. And you're the right messenger for that, right? You've got a hell of a lot of those toggle switches switched on for you. And so I am inspired by the clarion call that you are giving with that monologue, because I am necessarily not the right messenger for that, right? You are an insider with a community of people that's both struggling and doing some things that society would rather not have happen.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredibly important for people like you and the leaders of the other groups to be there and say, this is not what it is to be a man. Yeah. When you are frustrated, you do not go buy a gun and bring it to school and harm other people. That is not what it's like to be a man. And there's voices out there that might criticize that standard, right? They might say, I'm frustrated that a girl didn't talk to me at school, and so I have the right to do something, like that. And it's important that there's a diversity of voices coming from somebody who looks and talks like you to counter some red pill stuff out there that's I don't think is pushing society forward.
Yeah, definitely not. I would say categorically not. They're pulling society back, and it's, it is, society has a tendency to do, we were talking about this with, elections and all of that. When you take a big step forward, there is an equal and opposite reaction by society to pull back. Because there's a large group of people that want to just maintain the status quo. I'm doing good. Life is good. I don't want things to change. Right. So when we elect a black president for the first time in our nation's history, that's a big step forward in racial equality. It doesn't completely fix the solution, but it's a big step forward. And we saw a huge backlash of racially charged violence against the black community as a consequence of that event, because there was a large group of people that said, I don't like this. I'm going to lose the privileges that I've enjoyed as a white man. I want to shove that back, that thing back in the bottle.
And does that very reaction meet the definition of a man that we just outlined?
Hell no.
How fascinating is that?
Right.
Right? The people...
Fundamental lack of emotional regulation.
There you go. And exactly. And self-restraint.
And self-restraint.
Right? Internal confidence to say, yes, if I get this inflated benefit taken away, it won't feel great, but I've benefited from a lot of things that I didn't deserve maybe before.
Yeah.
And to say, I'm going to be okay if society's just a little bit more equal. I'm going to be okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is the charge to men, to white men, to straight men, to have the self-awareness and have the ability to look inward and think to themselves, how have I enjoyed privilege? And
even if my life wasn't easy.
yes, because again,
right. We have to
keep saying it.
because I think it gets misunderstood too often, and I don't want folks to misunderstand what you're saying, because largely they probably agree with it.
Yeah.
And it's that one word that seems to get us into trouble so often.
Privilege does not mean that you have had an easy life. I think it's important for us to look inward and understand that if women are making the same amount of money as men, we're going to be okay.
Well,
this is a positive for society.
Well, and if you can't have that much magnanimity that you just demonstrated with that statement, it's also going to benefit you because your family married to a straight woman is going to have more money.
Yes.
So if you can't get there on the theoretical ground,
right,
at least get there from a selfish perspective.
Yeah.
my family's going to have more money.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think this comes back to the 3 P's of like masculinity. Protect, provide, preside. Have you heard those?
Is that ironic that the gay man doesn't know the 3 P's of masculinity?
A little bit.
Yeah.
But so these are thrown around a lot.
Say them one more time.
Protect, provide, preside.
Oh, fascinating.
There's this idea among the greater culture of manly men that in order to be a real man, you need to protect, you need to provide for your family, and you need to preside over your family. And I've been thinking a lot about this and how we can reframe it for the modern world that we live in, where it is not economically realistic for a man to be the sole income provider and be able to provide fully for a family. It's unrealistic in the world that we live in today. Right. You need to have a dual income household. And what does provide mean? It used to mean you bring home the bacon.
Right, because your wife was not allowed to be a lawyer.
Yes.
Your wife was not allowed to be a doctor.
Yes.
She could not go and be trained for these things in a false deflation of her value, dignity, worth. You know, we've talked a lot about false inflation. This is just the equal and opposite. You know, she could not. So you had to.
Yeah. And I've been reworking these in my head because not every man is a go-getter like that. Not every man is meant to go out and make $300,000 a year.
And let's really cut to the chase here. Not every man has the skills to make as much money as his wife.
Yes. Thank you for getting to that faster than I would have. So, what does provide mean in this day and age? I don't think it means being the one who brings home the bacon. I think in today's day and age, where women have pretty much the same opportunity to get the jobs that men have enjoyed for always, maybe provide means recognizing that your wife is a fucking all-star and she could go and be one of the best surgeons in the country and bring home $1 million a year. And maybe your role, you're not great at earning money, but you're really good at raising kids. Maybe provide means stepping aside to allow the person in this relationship who is better at making money to go and make the money so that your family unit can be better taken care of from an economic point of view.
And if you don't have the self-awareness and the
It does take a lot of self-awareness.
If you don't have the self-awareness and capacity to demonstrate the masculine quality of self-restraint, to say, I don't need to work outside the home, at least have the, on an order of magnitude level less, the selfish desire to equip your family with more money than you could make on your own, right? If you're not going to be the surgeon and you can see the writing on the wall, right, and you can't get to a place of checking your ego and processing your emotions about how that makes you feel, at least just be selfish for your family and say, I'd rather make $300,000 a year with my wife working outside the home than $100,000 that I could make at a job that I have the skills for, right? If you can't get there, using generosity of spirit and emotional processing, just get there selfishness for your own family and kids.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Shifting gears a little bit. We mentioned it's Pride Month. It's June. It's Pride Month. It is also Men's Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yeah.
I find it interesting that they're the same month.
Yeah. Stars are aligned on that.
Yeah.
Maybe the universe is telling us something.
Yeah.
Maybe the universe is saying you should do a podcast.
Yeah. So do you as a gay man feel included in Men's Mental Health Awareness Month? Or do you feel like when people talk about men's mental health awareness as it pertains to this month, they're only talking about straight men?
My guess is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month is a relatively recent pronouncement.
I would believe so, probably in the last 5 years.
Sure. I would guess so too. And so, because gay men have been struggling with mental health since we came out, right? And the way that kind of we feel when we tell the world, hey, I'm going to disappoint you big time here. That's a really good question, because I don't think that I hear our mental health concerns in that, because I think it's a relatively recent thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Interesting.
Whereas I think society has recently started to look at the data and see what's going on and was like, we got to do something,
Yeah.
because the folks in charge are not okay.
Right.
And so we've been struggling for a long time, and, but we've also, like I said, started support groups and put together gay men's choruses and put together safe spaces and bars and fought for Pride Month, fought for Pride celebrations, right? And so I think this is society's way of saying, if the kids aren't okay, let's take them to Disneyland or something. Like, can we get something going, right? Can we get some support going for them? Because, the data tells us, there's some shifts that aren't looking good for society and people's experiences, especially with young, like you said earlier, white men, maybe socioeconomically not as resourced as other people in society. That's a group that's, if we're going to talk about a crisis, it would appear that it's a red alarm fire.
Yeah.
With that group.
Yeah. What do gay men uniquely struggle with that other men have figured out already? And what do you think gay men have figured out that their straight brothers seem to struggle with? The things that come to my mind are like, maybe themes around like shame, guilt,
for sure,
fear, self-worth, joy.
I was just going to say, I would love to answer it from, what do I see my community struggle with that your community seems to have figured out?
Sure.
If you'd be willing to answer it, in reverse.
Would it say it again?
So I would love to, from an outsider looking in to the straight male community, I would love to be able to say, what it seems like you guys have figured out is something that we struggle with, right? Yeah. Does that make sense? And maybe it would make sense for you to answer the exact opposite.
Sure.
What I think straight men seem to either have figured out or have ease with is kind of this confidence that is the inverse of the guilt and shame that you just outlined, right? I think something that gay men see, in the classic example in media is like the straight football player picking on the gay kid in high school, right?
Yeah.
And the incredible confidence that you must either get or have to be a football player or the quarterback on the football team, right? And then the incredible guilt and shame that you must feel if you're the gay kid in high school, right? And so for me, when I see straight men having ease with something or having something that's kind of like, I wish there were more of that in my community. It's the confidence that we're constantly questioning ourselves. Are my shorts too short? Am I wearing nail polish, for example? Am I going into a space that's going to, hold the proverbial $20 bill up to the light to see if it's, real or not? I think there's a certain quiet, cool Marlboro Man aesthetic that we don't necessarily have internally. I don't think a lot of us feel the confidence that you guys seem to just swagger through the world with. And it's something that when I do feel that, or when I do have it, I'm like, oh, this is what it's like on the other side. This is what it must be like to walk into the room and have no question about being accepted into almost any space that you walk into.
Yeah. That's really
and not only accepted, but elevated.
Yeah.
Right? And respected.
Yeah.
It's like that meme about a man getting applauded in a company meeting for coming up with an idea that a woman said 3 minutes ago,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. That's really interesting. And what's funny is I would say kind of the same thing.
Wow. Fair.
Not necessarily the Marlboro Man part, the cool, calm, kind of collected, like suave swagger, but the confidence to just be unashamedly you.
I did not expect you to go that direction with that.
Really?
That's awesome. I'm getting, it's very emotional to hear that.
Yeah. I mean, as we mentioned earlier, there is a box that straight men have to exist in order to be...
And it's narrower than the box that we're allowed to fit in.
Yes. And so for a lot of men, maybe a lot of straight men, maybe sometimes they feel like painting their nails. Maybe they want to wear pink. Maybe they want to
hold a bag over their shoulder that's not a backpack.
Yeah. Maybe they want to do their hair in a certain way that's slightly more flamboyant.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to stand in a certain way or move in a little sassy of a way that is considered to be more flamboyant or more feminine.
Maybe they want to do facials on Friday night with their girlfriend and watch a rom-com.
Yeah. Maybe.
Normally that's stuff we have to do with your girlfriends, right?
Yeah, and none of that from the outside, from over here looking to your community, none of that seems to be anything that you guys hesitate at all with. You just do whatever you feel like, and you're just you, and fuck the world, they can deal with it.
It's the freedom that comes with front-loading disappointment.
Yeah.
Right? We know from
earlier,
the minute that we come out that we're no longer being considered anymore.
Yeah.
And so when mom and dad aren't looking, I can do whatever I want.
Right.
They're already done kind of holding out hope for me.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what do I have to lose?
Yeah. And so I think it's interesting you said front loading, and it just clicked for me. The shame, the guilt, the fear, the self-worth, all of that stuff that you guys front loaded, right, like around the time that you came out, and I imagine shame and guilt a lot before you came out.
Oh yeah.
When you knew, but you hadn't come out yet.
For sure.
I think for straight men, so many of us struggle with shame and guilt, not necessarily surrounding masculinity and like this idea of being a man, but so many of us struggle with shame and guilt, and no one talks about it. And because no one talks about it, and I've talked about this before, like because no one talks about it, then you feel even more shame and guilt because I'm the only one that feels this way. How am I supposed to be a man if I'm feeling this way and no other men are feeling this way? Well, every other man is feeling that way, but no one's talking about it. And so guess what? All of them feel the exact same way that you do and feel the same shames that you do about the fact that they think they're the only ones as well. And so we just need to talk about it.
It gets very meta, feeling shame and guilt about feeling shame and guilt.
Yeah.
So that's...
It really does. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit. Homophobia. There's a lot of different directions that we can take this. But I think the big things that I want to know about and that I would like to bring to the listeners, where does homophobia come from? Also, have societal expectations encouraged homophobia in men at large or just in straight men in particular? Is homophobia common among gay men? I don't even know if it is.
Here's where I'll start with this conversation.
Sure.
I feel like it's only fair for me to set the table for this conversation by checking my privilege here. Just like I think we've been asking, how many times we said it, straight, white, cis, men.
Yeah.
If we're going to talk about this, I need to get out ahead of this conversation and say, I have a great deal of privilege as well in my community. If we're zooming into the gay or bi or trans community of people, of men, and we're just considering kind of like how society responds, right? And society includes the people in that community too.
Right.
I have a great deal of privilege within my community based on how society sees me and experiences me.
Yeah.
So if we just zoom in on the toggle switches that can be present in the gay male community, I've got a hell of a lot of them turned on for me, right? In my in my benefit. My self-awareness tells me I have to use that privilege, spend that political capital to protect and defend and stand up for the people who society would otherwise...
Who don't have the same political capital.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think we've been asking straight white cis men to do a lot of self-reflection and work so far.
I would say so, yeah.
I feel it's only appropriate for me to put myself on that same chopping block a little bit and say, within my community, I show up physically in this body in a way that society is uncomfortable with, but they're not going to throw me out of the room. Okay? I'm still going to be heard.
Yeah.
To a degree that you would be, for example, right? To a certain...
Especially living in the DC area.
For sure. Yeah. So I think to answer your first question, like where does homophobia come from? I have a theory that it's related to like the spectrum of acceptable male expression, right? And the narrow lane on that spectrum, that continuum that you guys are expected to occupy and no other part of this, right? It comes from society's narrowness for male expression. Because if you're outside of that narrow lane of acceptable male expression and you want to paint your nails, that's unacceptable, right? To mainstream society.
Yeah.
And maybe this is jumping the gun a little bit, but the wider we can make that lane of societal acceptable, societally acceptable male expression, I think the less homophobia there necessarily would be. Because we're not forcing you to be the aloof Marlboro man who only needs to come into town once a month. Right? We're saying, if you're feeling a certain way and you just want to watch movies with your girlfriend and do face masks on a Friday night, that's an acceptable expression of you being a man. It is okay for you to carry your bag however you want to carry it.
Interesting.
It is okay for straight men to wear a cutoff crop top, right? The gays have started that 5 years ago. It's now become mainstream. It's okay.
I'm bringing it back this summer.
Fair. Hop on the bandwagon.
Short shorts and crop top all summer.
The water's warm. Yeah, for sure. And with that conversation, hand in glove is the problem of internalized homophobia. Within our community, we are not susceptible to the narrow expectation of male expression just because we are gay, bisexual, or transgender. We are still fish swimming in the same societal water that you are. Just because society expects it of you and doesn't expect it of us, we still, through osmosis, have heard it, felt it, seen it, tasted it, touched it. So it's in us. It's just that we are the thing disappointing ourselves.
So are you saying that as a gay man you have experienced, or members of your community experience, homophobia towards yourself based on how you express yourself as a gay man?
I don't want to speak for anybody else.
Sure.
I will simply say it is hard to not hear societal messages of exclusion, suppression, oppression, just generally not nice things said about me, and not be affected by that.
And not internalize those messages and have issues of like self-worth and self-value relating to all of that.
Yeah, it's a narrator in your head who you'd rather not hear from.
Right.
Because that narrator is the same narrator in your head saying, don't paint your nails.
Yeah.
Don't watch a rom-com with your girlfriend on Friday night.
You're sitting there painting your nails and you're like, oh, this is so gay of me.
Potentially, or it's probably less direct than that.
Sure.
It's probably a little more nuanced. It's probably a little more subtle.
Maybe not that language.
Sure, but it's certainly like, I think the people that you mentioned earlier when you said what you see my community not struggle with, that you think straight men struggle with, that full expression of who you are, I think those are the bravest men in my community.
Yeah.
Those are the bravest men who have done the work to silence that unhelpful societal narrator that says, don't paint your nails.
Yeah.
And they say, fuck it, 7 days a week, 7 ways to Sunday.
Yeah.
And they are simply who they are.
Yeah.
Those are the people that, if we're talking about a warrior or a fighter, that's when I get my back up. Because if you're going after those people because you think I feel the same way about them that society has told us to feel about them, you've got another thing coming.
Yeah. And I feel like also, if you're going to come at those people and think it's going to be an easy fight, you got another thing coming.
Oh, yeah. Forget me for a second. They're scrappy as hell.
Yeah.
You know?
Like you said, they've done the work, and they are so comfortable and confident in who they are.
Yeah.
They're not going to back down from that.
Yeah. You ever try to fight a drag queen in an alley?
No,
Yeah.
and I
Probably don't want to.
do not want to.
Yeah. Scrappy.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I think I didn't even realize that. I don't think I understood or realized that internal dialogue existed among members of the gay community. Like, you know, I have a few friends who are gay, but I would not say that we've talked about like this type of thing. before. Um,
And I don't want to speak for them, right?
Sure.
If you sat them down and they said, "What's internalized homophobia?" and then you told, what it was, and they're like, "No, I don't struggle with that at all." God bless,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I would love to kind of have that.
Yeah. But I mean,
that experience.
But if you've experienced it, then you're not the only one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for
You know?
sure. I mean, internalized homophobia is it's a common. I don't think it's a diagnosis, but I think it's a common topic in like talk therapy.
Okay.
It's a studied affliction, a studied experience that a lot of people have, and as evidenced by self-harm in our community. People who...
Is that very prevalent?
Yeah, I think mental health issues that come from kind of feeling, that society could take you or leave you. Maybe it's a family, right? That's like,
Yeah.
hey, thanks but no thanks.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
you're not
that'll
welcome.
cause
Yeah, for sure.
a lot of...
So yeah, and then when you don't feel self-actualized, integrated as a human being, mind, body, spirit.
Yeah.
Fully accepting yourself, having the self-awareness to say, hey, this is true for me, and I have to figure out how to not struggle against what is true for me.
Yeah.
Like if there's a better definition for like self-actualization and integration, I don't know it.
Yeah.
Right? Because not struggling against knowing your core so well and then doing the work to not struggle against it and to accept it, talk about the work, capital
Yeah.
T, capital W, that's some hard shit.
Yeah.
And when you've got society telling you that who you are is not okay, the human experience is hard enough without society telling you, giving you that message.
Yeah.
So there is the shame and guilt present in my community, and I should probably more humbly just talk about myself, because I do want people with different experiences to represent their experiences that might be different than mine. Certainly, I've struggled with shame and guilt. Certainly, I've struggled with worth and how my place in society, my place in the greater community of men. I think this discussion is so important because I don't think I have experienced a great deal of comfort or security knowing where I fit, for example. And so I think it's an incredible conversation.
Yeah. This just popped into my head. Do you think gay men who are more like you, meaning more kind of straight presenting, is that the right way to say that?
Yeah, I mean, it's what I was talking about when I was acknowledging my privilege.
Yeah. Do you think, because the male attraction is a spectrum, flamboyancy and kind of like masculine versus feminine is also a spectrum, both in gay men and in straight men, and bi and trans and all of them. And there are a lot of gay men who you would never guess that they are gay because they are so straight presenting. They are so traditionally masculine.
Yeah, to society's eyes.
To society's eyes. And then there are the gay men who are like, oh, yeah, he's gay.
You can see it a mile away, right?
Yeah. Do you think that for the men who are more the gay men who are more straight presenting, that internalized homophobia is more prevalent because they are closer to that line of like, well, they like in how I feel, I do feel more aligned with society's traditional views of masculinity, but I am attracted to men. Instead of, I feel more aligned with society's traditional views of femininity, and I'm attracted to men. Do you think that that internalized homophobia is more prevalent in
I'd never thought about that question before, and I'll go back to what I said earlier about like we've already disappointed society, so it's easier. because society is more disappointed by men who subscribe to society's standard of masculinity, because society is more disappointed, right? Like, using that model, more suspicious, right?
More disappointed than the straight presenting
Yeah.
gay men?
I do think potentially there could be a kernel of truth there.
Yeah.
Where it's like, I still, because society sees me as like, but you're straight, right? Like, come on. You're still
you're not, like,
choosing
really
this? Yeah.
gay.
Right. It's definitely a fascinating theory, hypothesis, question.
Yeah.
And one that, I'm going to ponder, because I think it's very possible that because folks who are like, well, society doesn't even accept me as a man, so I might as well do whatever I want. It's possible,
right,
that there's less internalized stuff. But I don't want to speak for anybody else.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah. Let's do a whole podcast on that.
Yeah. Think about it and come back.
For sure.
And for that matter, any listeners who have any thoughts on that, I would love to hear your thoughts, because that question literally just came to me as you were talking.
It's fascinating. I had never, ever even considered that there could be a spectrum, right? I knew that some people struggled with internalized homophobia, maybe some people didn't, but I never kind of like
put it in that framework.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah. One of the questions that we had written down was, what does internalized homophobia teach us about our place in society as gay men?
Yeah. I think it's just understanding that we are not going to be respected, trusted, given the same benefits of the doubt, without working tooth and nail to get there.
Yeah. Final big question. How can our non-straight brothers and the community of straight men at large support each other? Do we even see a benefit in supporting each other? And I think, just for my own, as I was thinking about this question, there seems to be a big divide between the gay community, I don't know if you can even group gay, bi, and trans in a community like this, or if they're their own separate communities. I know as a straight man, we tend to view, it's the LGBTQ plus community, as if it's one big group, right? Because that's kind of the language model that we've used. And, there's the pride flag has all the different colors, and Pride Month and Pride Parade represents all the different things. But I think in the context of this, I do think it's important to recognize gay community, bi community, trans community, those might be separate in a way that most straight men don't even recognize. and then there is the straight community. There's a little bit of crossover, but by and large, I think straight men tend to socialize with straight men, and gay men tend to socialize with gay men. And I'm not sure about how the bi and trans works.
In my experience, we even struggle a little bit with fully, saying, if you are going to come for trans people, you're going to have to go through me first, right? I do think that there is not enough fight always in the LGBT community for our trans brothers and sisters, because trans people are just the long tail. If trans people go, they're coming for us next. Right? So do not lull yourself into a false sense that the T can be hacked off without affecting the LGB part of our community.
Right.
If we allow trans people to be discriminated against, to go by the wayside, we're next. So I am under no illusions that the folks who are out for trans people right now, number 2 on the menu is us. So There is
Yeah.
there is nothing in my
hadn't thought
bones
about that.
will not fight tooth and nail for our trans brothers and sisters. Not just because I am, like you said, often grouped in with a group of people whose experiences are far different than mine,
Yeah.
and similar in some ways.
Sure.
There's not an iota of doubt in my mind that they dislike me just as much as they dislike trans people. It's just that they would rather divide and conquer, right? Because
Yeah.
it's easier to say, oh, you're not like these people that we're vilifying,
Right.
you know.
When I
So join forces,
Yeah.
and let's, you know. And it's like, no, absolutely not.
One, I think it's interesting to you go for the weakest link first,
Absolutely.
right? "Quote unquote weakest." Not saying that trans people are
No.
weak, but saying that
It's just the most vilified of our community.
and also the I think the newest to be accepted by
Yeah.
society.
Last in, first out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Are socially the weakest.
Absolutely.
So they're the easiest ones to attack because, like, the gay community, you guys have been fighting
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
equal representation and equal rights since, I mean, ever, but like really, really big since like what, the 60s?
Yeah, I mean, arguably
70s?
Stonewall is kind of seen as the birthplace of at least the Pride movement. Certainly,
Stonewall?
incredible. Stonewall's the bar in New York City,
Okay.
where Marsha P. Johnson threw the brick due to police raids, where they were raiding the Stonewall Inn inappropriately, illegally. Simply because it was a gay bar, right?
establishment.
So
Interesting. I had no idea.
a black drag queen. It's possible that she was a trans woman as well. I wish I had had that full knowledge because it is important. She is an icon in our community. She threw the first brick through the window, I believe, or no, maybe even at police. I can't remember. But that is widely regarded as kind of like the you'll hear in our community, in our history, like, throw the first brick. Be the person who stands up and says, this is not okay. We are not doing anything different than any other bar on this street. Why are we the ones getting raided?
Right.
That
was the tea going into the heart.
exactly,
The first,
watershed moment, right?
Yeah.
Plant the flag, Marsha P. Johnson. She needs to be understood in mainstream history, not just in LGBT history.
Oh, I will look her up. I'd never heard of her before.
Yeah, incredible story. And so the only reason I bring that up is because certainly people were working hard for equality before that. Certainly kind of understood to be maybe the impetus for pride, or that's kind of where we draw our celebratory, unbridled joy from. It's like, not in this fucking bar.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
You know, and so yeah, definitely been fighting for a while, but there are kind of those moments in
Right.
LGBT history to point back to and say we can trace at least some of this to very specific watershed moments, and all the more reason to not allow the tea to be hacked off by the powers that may like to see
Right.
trans people, disconnected from our fight for equality. If they started it and now we are experiencing the benefits of the first brick thrown, we don't get to hack them off.
For sure.
The LGBT plus community, they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have these different communities, and there is this divide, at least between the straight community and the LGBTQ plus community. And how can we bridge that gap? How can we come together to create a stronger community?
Yeah.
Because I have a few gay friends, not many. And I'm sure that for a lot of members of the LGBTQ plus community, especially in DC, where it's a very
Gay male heavy city.
yeah.
It is by the numbers, DC is gayer than both San Francisco and New York.
Wow. Like in ratio to
Yeah,
population?
percentage of
Wow.
population. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. I don't know. I don't know that I have a ton of like, let's start this group ideas, but I do have like general principles of like, we're not disconnected because of anything inherent in either of us.
Yeah.
We're disconnected because society doesn't see you as a threat, and it does see me as a threat. And it's a false distinction. It's a false choice. And I think that gay men could benefit greatly from having the confidence, right? The things that I listed that I see that I think is admirable and I wish that we had more of. And I hope that as straight men experience more gay men in their lives, or what it's like to be a gay man, whether it's on TV or movies or TikTok or Instagram or whatever, and diving down the rabbit hole of gay Twitter, for example. There's a whole subculture.
Oh, I'm sure.
Of memes, and they are so funny. If I do say, I don't have the authorship of any of it, but I'm constantly buoyed by the unbridled joy of our community. When faced with some of the most awful oppression, suppression, rolling back of rights, vilification, our community stays hysterical on memes and TikTok videos and just like this biting, clever, smart humor. And when I don't have the strength on a given day to smile or laugh because I'm so disappointed, for example, about like something that's going on right now in our country, to be able to like see our community be inventive and funny and creative and, like you mentioned, free, open to express themselves the way they are, that does me a great deal of it gives me a great deal of hope and support and inspiration. And I hope by now your listeners and your viewers understand, and if they don't, I am incredibly proud to be a gay man. I wouldn't trade it for the world. My life is vastly more rich because of it. And if there's anybody who thinks that I think my life would be easier, or it would be, maybe you've seen in movies, especially The Family Stone, where maybe somebody has said, well, you wouldn't wish that your kid's gay, right? And, it's like, well, actually, I just wish my kid is who they are and who they want to be.
Yeah.
Because it's not, you can't have Alex Hoekstra and not have gay Alex Hoekstra. That person doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And so I hope that the reverse is true, that there's plenty of things that, that we can resource the other direction and be like having the self-awareness to be like, we're actually really not good at this, but they are. or from the other side, like, we suck at this, but, they know women really well, and I'm going to ask her gay best friend what to get her for our anniversary or Christmas or whatever.
Which, pro tip right there.
Do it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? Like like not seeing, like the gay best friend not seeing the boyfriend as a threat, and the boyfriend not seeing the gay best friend as a threat, and figuring out a way to like have this great, rich, incredible, relationship with somebody who is really important to your girlfriend, right? And for us, somebody who is incredibly important to our best friend, maybe some of whom are like me. They've been my best friends since preschool, and so their husbands knowing he's like this amorphous person in her life, not a brother, but kind of like at that level,
right.
Maybe a little bit more important because she chose me, and not like, all these amazing, rich things in life. And so I don't think it, I do think that there's probably a lot of men in my community who feel threatened by straight men, right? Maybe they were bullied in high school, you know? And I'm sure that there's feelings of threat in the other direction where society has told you lies or fed misgivings into your community that I hope we can do a good job of.
Yeah. And I think in the greater conversation of sports, because there haven't been too much recently, but I remember like when I was in high school or in college, there was a lot of talks around like gay guys in sports and being in the locker room and, you know, guys being uncomfortable with having a gay guy on the team because it meant that shared locker room with someone who was attracted to men. And, you know, that was a really common talking point of certain groups of men at the time in, you know, the late 2000s and the early 2010s. And you know, someone said to me, and if there was any inkling of that in my mind at the time, this just kind of nipped it in the bud right there. It was like, are you attracted to all women? Well, no. Okay.
Yeah.
How do you know he's attracted to you?
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't want to look at it.
I've had maybe similar conversations on unrelated topics, but it's like, respectfully, don't flatter yourself.
Yeah.
Just because I'm a gay man does not mean I'm into you.
Right.
So it's, you know,
it's
going to be okay. You're going to be fine.
Right.
You may have some uncomfortable moments. It may be awkward for you, and at the same time, you can't assume that you are the object of every gay man's affection.
Right. Yeah. And I, you know, speaking from personal experience, that is definitely like when I had multiple experiences where gay men hit on me and I didn't want it. That was the trap that I fell into when I was in college was that. And yeah, I mean, it took a fair amount of self-reflection and putting the ego aside, and also meeting a bunch of other gay men who weren't hitting on me for me to kind of get over that.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair angle to place it in the context of how women are treated, right?
Yeah.
It's probably the same way women feel when they don't feel safe around any men because one man did something to them, or two men did something to them, or God forbid, more than two men have done something awful to a human being who happens to be a woman, who then for the rest of her life feels a little bit of a tinge when they're alone with a man, for example. It's why so many women come to gay bars, because they tell us they feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't doubt it for a second. That just made me think of the man or the bear in the woods.
Oh God!
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I knew so many guys that were like insulted by that, and I was like, can you blame them for preferring to be in the woods with a bear?
Yeah. It's like you don't know the effect that the abuse of power has had
of even one person
done for the rest of their lives.
Trust is gone.
Yeah, for sure. And that's not just true of, you know, gay men and straight men or men and women. It's true of any abuse of power. And it's a problem that unfortunately stays with somebody for the rest of their life. Oftentimes takes a lot of inner work that they shouldn't have to do, right?
Yeah.
Being a human being is hard enough already. Adding on an extra level of, okay, I thought I was only going to have to do 1 hour of homework a day. Now, because of this one experience, I now have to do 3 hours of homework, you know, because I've got all this other stuff now.
Yeah.
All this other baggage to deal with. That's, you know, it's unfair.
And just navigating daily life is harder with all that extra baggage.
Absolutely.
Like, it's not only that you have the extra homework, but it's also just like just going through your
carrying
day
around
is just
more
more
books,
difficult. Yeah, you're
proverbial
carrying.
books.
Yes.
For sure.
Well, I think it'd be really cool if we could come up with a couple of tangible things to close with. Tangible things that people can do, straight men, gay men, trans men, bi men, can do to help to bridge that gap between our greater communities.
I'm going to say something that might feel uncomfortable, and because there's a power differential, right, as seen through the eyes of society.
Yeah.
I actually think it would be really cool for straight men to say, listen, we know who holds the power in this dynamic, right?
Yeah.
We need to do a better job making you feel comfortable in our spaces, because we necessarily assume the benefits of the power if we're talking about these two groups of people, and saying, like, how does a space like the Masculinity Project make LGBT plus men feel more comfortable? Like, you did a podcast, so maybe that's already step one, check.
Yeah.
And how do straight men make live in-person events comfortable and widen the aperture for prompts and questions, and making sure that we're not asking questions or talking about subjects from only a heteronormative place or angle, and I think that feels really tangible.
Yeah, and I appreciate you kind of calling up straight men to kind of own what is undoubtedly, it's more our responsibility to bridge the gap than it is your responsibility.
Mm-hmm. And there are plenty of gay men who may have a different perspective.
Sure.
And I think it's awesome. Number one, like I said, this podcast, this effort, all the work you're doing with the allied groups is so important, right? And yes, it's more work to be like, all right, now I got to resource a bunch of gay men with mental health tips for their experiences. Great, it's just extra work, but it's in the end, it's richer, it's better, it's a more holistic group. It creates better outcomes,
Yeah. When I think it doesn't need to be that complicated.
Great. I love to hear that.
I don't think it needs to be that the straight men are thinking of all the things that the gay men have been through and all of these things. How would you treat your straight friend? Mm-hmm. How would you treat your straight brother? Are you going to approach him and dap him up? Mm-hmm. Are you going to give him a hug?
Yeah.
Would you kiss him on the cheek? I don't know.
Yeah.
Just do that.
Fair.
Just do that. Do that with the gay guys in your life, and
they will feel like $1 million.
With
I'm not going to speak for them. I will feel like $1 million if you treat me like if you hug 3 of your straight friends and then you hug me the same way.
Yeah.
Like $1 million. If you don't hug them and you treat me the same way, great.
Right.
If you don't hug them, and
don't dap them up and then kiss me on the cheek because I'm gay.
And unless you have an inside joke,
right?
Where it's
unless that's an established relationship,
then do it. Like, how cool is that, right? And yes, please do that. And then, if you feel uncomfortable doing the same thing or having an inside joke, it is also appropriate to say, I don't really know what to do right now with a gay guy. Like, should I do the same thing that I do with all my other bros? Like, just ask.
Yeah.
There's so much...
Talk about the elephant in the room.
So much mad respect for somebody who just addresses it head on, attacks it head on. You know what? And that takes a lot of self-awareness. It takes a lot of vulnerability to just say, normally I would have the power in this situation, and I'm actually going to go equal with you and say, we're on the same level here. I don't know how to... greet you, interact with you. I don't know, you're my, maybe you're meeting your girlfriend's best gay friend for the first time. is it weird for me to get your number? Like, just
Yeah.
ask,
Yeah.
just say it,
Also, I think in the case of like straight guy meeting his girlfriend's gay best friend, I feel like, I don't know. Let me know what you think. But I feel like it would be beneficial to have a conversation of addressing the elephant in the room of like, is there anything uncomfortable here? Do we need to talk about anything?
Fair.
Because there is potential for some butting of heads here and some like pulling on the girlfriend,
Yeah. That relationship that potential for tension that you're talking about unaddressed is probably,
I think it creates more tension if it's unaddressed.
yeah.
Like I would love to, with my one day girlfriend, if she has a gay best friend, like, hey, let's grab a beer and just like chat.
Absolutely.
Are we good? How do you feel about
Right.
me? How do I feel about you? Like, let's get to be friends.
Or
and
even
for the benefit of her,
There
because it is very ego based from both parties to have that tension and not set whatever ego it is aside to say we both love this woman from a different point of view, like a different type of love. We both love this woman and let's get to be friends so that she can enjoy both of us in her life.
And to add to the list of ways where we are the same, we both have fragile egos. And I don't mean you and me.
Yeah.
I mean our community's fragile egos,
Yeah.
right? And going back to what you said, I think even like taking it up a level and framing it positively and being like, we both care about her so much. I just want to get to know you because you have an incredible, vast plethora of experiences with her that I necessarily don't.
Yeah.
And I think it's very, very, very cool. I would feel like $1 million if my best friend's significant other, whether it was a lesbian or a straight man, took me aside and said, you grew up with her.
Yeah.
And there's nothing more that I want than to get to know her even better. Can I buy you a drink?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's like, if there's a better way to build a bridge, I don't know it.
Yeah.
Because it feels natural and authentic and generous and and humbling and grateful and a lot of
and also like what a great way to win some boyfriend points too.
Duh. She's gonna be thrilled.
She's gonna love you for that. That you made that effort to get to know her friend and also get to know her better through her friend's experiences with her.
Well, and not to mention that it's possible that she was sitting front row when he got bullied by straight men in high school and middle school. And to see,
what healing!
Yeah.
Oh my God!
It's like a full circle moment, right? So she gets to see an incredibly evolved boyfriend, be the anti-bully that she, you know what I mean? There's a lot of layers.
I have goosebumps right now. My heart is so warm just thinking about that.
Yeah, it's cool, right?
That would be incredible. Yeah.
A lot of healing to be had.
Yeah. Do you have anything else?
Thanks for having me. This is amazing.
Thank you for coming on.
You're doing God's work. And, I don't know where this kind of community goes from here. But I think it's worth a fight.
Yeah.
I think it's worth the fight. I think it's worth the effort.
Yeah, I agree. And I think both communities and society as a whole would greatly benefit and get stronger and more tight knit and just stronger when our communities learn to invest in each other and learn to lean on each other and support each other in that way. We are social creatures and I think the problem with labels like gay, bi, trans is it's an easy way to dehumanize someone. And so, if there's one thing to take away from my point of view, if there's one thing to take away from this conversation is just talk to them. Just treat them like a fellow human being, treat them like a fellow brother, and just get to know them and try to bridge that gap and learn to humanize the people on the other side,
Yeah.
because there's some incredible people on both sides.
Yeah, and I can't tell you how many times, to just tie a bow on it all, even when you said, "Whoa, I had no idea that that's how you thought about that," or "Oh my gosh,"
Which happened, by the way, for everyone listening, which happened not many times during this conversation, but so many times when we were talking for the last 3 weeks about having this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. And I hope it was beneficial, right? I hope I hope none of it felt threatening. I hope it felt like this is just a richer understanding of the human experience, the other people walking around on this planet with me. That's how you process that? Mind blowing,
Yeah, definitely. No, it's been eye-opening.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on.
Pleasure.
All right, what an incredible conversation. What an incredible episode with Alex. A couple of housekeeping notes just to wrap the episode. So first of all, want to say big thank you to Alex for coming on. This was a last minute thing that we threw together. We started having some of these conversations over Instagram messages when he commented on one of my posts that I did earlier in the month about Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And then we started talking a lot about gay-straight relations and mental health in the gay community and in the straight community, and talking a lot about these bigger topics. And we kind of just decided on the spot, we need to do a podcast episode, and it needs to come out by the end of the month because it's Pride Month and it's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And schedules did not line up a lot, but we made it. We slid in right at the end of the month. So big shout out to him for making this happen. It was an incredible conversation. And for those who celebrate and recognize, happy Pride Month. So a couple things to wrap. So I did end up looking up Marsha P. Johnson and reading a little bit about her. So she was an activist in New York, in the New York gay community, drag queen community. She modeled for Andy Warhol. She founded an activist group. I mean, this is just an incredible human being. I definitely need to read more. And if you're interested, highly recommend read up on her. Just go and read her wiki page. But the event Stonewall that Alex was talking about, where the brick got thrown through the window, that happened in 1969. And so he was talking about that as being kind of this watershed moment for the gay rights movement. And so 1969 was when that event took place, which means that 1969 was kind of when the gay rights movement kind of really took off. Obviously, there was little things happening before that, but that was kind of like the big moment where everything really started ramping up. Also, a couple of things that I will ask of you to help to support the show. If you enjoyed this show, if you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to listen to one of the other episodes and share this episode with someone else who you think might benefit. There are 3 big things that you can do to help benefit the show. First is share. Share this episode with someone who you think might benefit from this episode. Second one, subscribe to the show so that you get new episodes downloaded to your device when they come out. And finally, review. Write a review for the show. Even if you've just listened to this episode, write a review and talk about this episode specifically, or listen to multiple episodes and write a review about all the episodes. These are the biggest things you can do to help benefit the show. Subscribing and reviewing specifically are 2 things that you can really do to help boost the algorithm, so that when someone goes looking for a podcast on men's mental health or on masculinity, this show will show up in their feed. This will be something that pops up. And that's really important because it helps get the word out about the show, but also it helps men heal, because the work that I'm doing, the conversations that I'm having, they are to open the door to helping men step into their power to heal and kind of take control of their life and take control of their mental health. So I think it's really, really important work. And the more people that we can get listening to the show, I think the more men can heal and the more the world can start to move in a positive place. The third big thing is I want to hear from you. The purpose of this episode was never to lecture and for it to be kind of a situation where Alex and I are telling you what the answers to these questions are, you, the listener. The purpose of this episode was to bring these questions to the forefront, have a dialogue about them, and get you, the listener, to think about how you think about these questions. So that was the purpose of this dialogue, of this conversation, was to get you, the listener, to think and to kind of open a dialogue between the straight and the LGBT plus communities. So I want to hear from you. I'm going to leave in the show notes my podcast email address and the podcast's Instagram page. I'm also going to put Alex's Instagram link in the show notes as well. And I would love for you to send in some thoughts. Send me an email. Follow the Instagram page, send me a message on the Instagram page. Follow Alex if you don't already. Send him a message if you want to open a dialogue with him. We were talking after we stopped filming, we would love to hear your thoughts on any of these questions. Do you agree with the things that we were saying? Do you disagree with some of the things that we were saying? Do you have a different point of view? Do you have different life experiences? There was a lot of moments where I asked Alex a question and he said, well, I don't want to speak for everyone in our community. So if you are in the LGBT plus community and you have a different experience than Alex did, I would love to hear what that experience is, because I wanted to engage in this conversation because I'm genuinely curious about these things. So send us messages, send me an email. I would love to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear any feedback, and generally open a dialogue with us, open a dialogue with your friends, open a dialogue with your community about these topics. We want to get people thinking about these things. Also, in the show notes, I'm going to leave a link to subscribe to my email list. So for the email list, this is going to be something where right now it's mostly kind of a newsletter. I will eventually start providing resources as I get deeper into the men's work space. It's going to be for now a lot of kind of newsletter updates, things that I'm doing in the men's workspace. So things like new episodes of the podcast, maybe some shower thoughts that I had about these things. If I have a speaking gig coming up, I'll send an email about it, or I'll send a recap on the speaking gig, stuff like this. So if you're interested in that, please sign up for the email list. I'm not going to spam you. I don't send emails out every week. It's very much when I have something to say, I send an email out. And then last thing, at some point during the podcast, I got up while we were talking and actually grabbed a book that I wrote a chapter in to talk about principles of masculinity that I have come up with. So the book is this. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. Sacred Spaces, Volume 3. I've talked about it before in previous episodes, but so this book came out in February 2025 this year. Sacred Spaces is a group write book. There were 24 authors on the project, and I was one of them. So my chapter was chapter 21. It's called The Male Vacancy Project, Unmasking Masculinity for the Modern Man. And in this chapter, I talk about my experience getting out of an abusive relationship and how that changed me, how being in that relationship fundamentally destroyed me, broke me down. I got out of that relationship and I didn't know who I was or what I wanted or what kind of man I wanted to be. And so I had to go and find those things. I had to go searching for it and build myself back up from nothing. All right. And in the process, I learned a lot and I reflected a lot. And so everything that I reflected about is in my chapter in this book. Well, not everything. I only had 3,000 words, but there's a fair amount in this chapter. So if you're interested in reading that, please grab a copy of this book. I'm going to put the link to the Amazon to purchase this book. in the show notes. You'll also be able to find it in some local bookstores. And I finished the chapter with a few questions, a few journal prompts to help you start to think about the man that you want to be. So if you're interested in that, please pick up your copy. Please read it. Give the other chapters a read because the other 23 authors were absolutely incredible. Their stories are amazing too. So that's all I got for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, Amadeus signing off.